Hey, this is Andrew Brown from Exam Pro, and we are taking a look at Kubernetes Services. So Kubernetes Services allow you to attach a static IP address and a DNS name for a set of pods. And a Kubernetes service allows you to persist an address for a pod even if it dies. And the service also acts as a load balancer. And I kind of regret not having like something that looked a little bit more like a load balancer by like having a second line to drag there to show load balancing, but I mean, that's the way I designed the icon. But here you can see we have a service, we have endpoints. So that's basically the storing of the public IP address so that we can map the service to the pod. And you can see that this will have, I mean, I didn't write it in here, but this would actually have a static IP address that never changed, and then it would randomly distribute to the ones there. A pod without a service will have a dynamic IP address. So when the pod dies, so does the IP address. So that is the reason we want a service. So that doesn't happen. Kubernetes services have the following service types. We have cluster IP. This is the default. If you don't specify a type, it will be a cluster IP. It randomly forwards traffic to any pod set with the target port. You have headless, sends traffic to a very specific pod when you have stateful pods like a database. And we covered headless in the stateful set section there, where it doesn't assign a static IP address. It doesn't do load balancing. It just gives you like a DNS hostname resolution so you can specify the pod that way. We have node ports, so external service that allows you to use a worker node IP address. So it's a way of exposing the node, like opening a port on the node, because generally the cluster IP, it's internal, so you have to access it within the cluster. But we'll talk about that when we get to that slide there. We have load balancers, similar to node port, except leverages cloud service providers' load balancers. And then we have external names, so a special service that does not have selectors and uses DNS names instead. And this is used when, let's say, you have a database, like a managed database, like from AWS RDS or Google Cloud Spanner or something like that. And you can't point to an IP address, and you need to point to a DNS name, so use an external name to point to external resources.